Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. City officials were out taking down more tents and putting up a fence at a Lethbridge tent encampment site on Wednesday. BCN's Micah Quinn will have the details. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith is going up against a pretty big name in the Brooks Medicine by-election next month. Political reporter Tyler Dawson will explain. And in business news, the Bank of Canada has upped its key lending rate once again. We will tell you by how much.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Coaldale RCMP have confirmed that the body of a woman found on Monday in Lethbridge County near Range Road 225 was that of 34-year-old Tia Blood. Blood was first reported missing last Friday. 20-year-old Hunter Alexander Frank of Lethbridge was arrested in relation to the investigation. He's being charged with offering an indignity to human remains and theft under $5,000. Now, the investigation is ongoing. It's believed that Blood died on either October 19th or the 20th. Police are asking for more help with their investigation regarding the disappearance or death of Tia Blood. If you can help, please, you're asked to call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. A massive cleanup at a Lethbridge tent encampment was completed on Wednesday. A fence was also installed at the tent site by the Civic Centre track here in our city. The encampment was also the site of a shooting last July when two men got into a heated altercation. It resulted in one of the men getting shot in the leg. Homeless advocates are saying that not enough is being done to help with our city's most vulnerable. Video journalist Micah Quinn has the details.
Today, I happened to be driving past, seen all the police, was like, oh, we better stop.
Tents were taken down and a fence was erected by the old YMCA lot behind City Hall in downtown Lethbridge. Members of the Lethbridge Police Service were on hand on Wednesday morning by the tent encampment site located near the Civic Centre track, as well as city crews like the Downtown Sweep program who were removing items from the tent site. The city enacted the Petty Trespass Act earlier this year, which allows LPS to issue tickets to anyone that does not vacate the premises in a timely fashion. An advocate for our city's most vulnerable, Sarah Villebrin, says she doesn't understand how the city thinks that the homeless can pay off these tickets.
These people are homeless. They can't even afford to put a roof over their house. Chris, myself, and many others, community resources, individual people, we bring down meals all the time. I have people at my house right now showering that didn't know that this was happening. I have to go home and break the news to multiple homeless people that, hey, you don't have somewhere to go back to tonight.
Chris Raleigh ran for a spot on Lethbridge City Council in the 2021 municipal election and is also a homeless advocate here in our city. He was at the cleanup on Wednesday morning and stressed that the city is not doing enough to help out our homeless population.
They're putting the money in the wrong place, like to clean up the encampments. They have allotted the money to that, and it's frustrating because some of the homeless people are like, if you gave us the resources to keep the encampment clean, we would. And they want to have a safe place.
Bridge City News reached out to the city of Lethbridge regarding the installation of the fence and the recent encampment cleanup. They sent us a release which reads in part, over the past 5 months, this lot has been the site of an encampment that has become entrenched. That creates a safety risk to those living within them and to the community. There have been increased incidents of violence, aggressive behavior, illegal activity, overdoses, and unhealthy living conditions at this encampment. The city of Lethbridge is committed to balancing the needs of those experiencing homelessness and support them while still recognizing the needs of property and business owners impacted by encampments. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
You know, as the temperature continues to drop outside, a couple of nonprofit groups in our city say they're seeing more people using their services. Bill Ginther with the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen believes the increase is due to the encampment situation.
This morning, for an example, we served breakfast at 7 and we had 147 people. And that's fairly large for breakfast. Evening meal, we often see 150, 165, but for the breakfast, that's fairly big. And part of that is we're seeing a lot of encampments in our neighborhood again. Despite efforts to move people, they move back. So I think what happens is people hang more sheltered around buildings, and then of course they hang close to us because we provide meals.
Folks at the Alpha House, meanwhile, anticipate seeing an increase in people coming in as the colder weather sets in.
We are always just making sure we're being vigilant. Our outreach teams are connecting with folks on the street to bring them to the shelter to help them take a break from the cold. Our encampment team, our team that works with rough sleepers, are out there making sure that folks have supplies if they're not able to or willing to access shelter services, making sure that they have the supplies that they need to stay warm.
Both organizations say they always welcome donations such as food and clothing for some of the most vulnerable here in Lethbridge. Well, it was a slightly cooler day here in the city, feeling more like autumn with those cooler, gusty winds as well. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek of the forecast. Jeanette, warmer temperatures, however, could be just around the corner?
Yeah, days are going to warm up quickly, Hal, but oh so windy. On Thursday, we're looking at gusts from the west at 50 to 80 kilometers per hour. Into this evening, we're looking at an overnight low of 1 degree, but into Thursday, also, we're looking at that nice 10-degree weather with a mix of sun and cloud. And after that, it's going to be double digits for at least a week. I will have all those details coming up for you later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Questions were raised about Premier Danielle Smith's appearance at an event in Medicine Hat where she's seeking a seat in the legislature. Smith, who became Premier earlier this month, is running in a by-election in Brooks Medicine Hat. She attended a grand opening event for the new Co-op Wellness Commons at Medicine Hat College on Tuesday. Smith says she was only there as a role as Premier, but the opposition NDPs say it's a violation of the Elections Act.
My reading of the Elections Act is that should be a blackout period for making announcements during an electoral period, and we are on an electoral period here in the city of Medicine Hat with the Brooks Medicine Hat by-election. And so certainly my reading of it is that it contravenes that element of the Act. And I think interestingly enough, Danielle Smith seems to concur. She filed a grievance against the former PC government making announcements during an electoral period back in 2014. So, I mean, I think this warrants further investigation. Certainly, it goes against both the spirit of the Act and, in fact, historical comments made by Danielle Smith.
Now, the by-election for the riding is slated for November the 8th. Political reporter Tyler Dawson says Premier Danielle Smith should win the seat next month in Brooks Medicine Hat, but she's going up against a pretty big name, as in the former mayor of Brooks, Barry Morishita, who's also the leader of the Alberta Party.
This is probably a relatively safe spot for Danielle Smith to be running, certainly compared to the other option that was before her, which is the riding of Calgary Elbow. But she's running against someone who's pretty well known in the area. And she's running, and Barry Morishita, of course, the Alberta Party, is not a super left-wing party, running to the left of Danielle Smith, certainly, and the UCP, certainly, but not a New Democrat. So do I think Danielle Smith's going to lose? No, I don't. I think she'll probably take her seat in the legislature. But it does suggest that this is not necessarily going to be a cakewalk for her.
Mr. Tyler Dawson will also have details on the themes from the recent UCP and NDP conventions held in both Edmonton and Calgary. That's coming up after business news. Senior officers with the Ottawa Police Service are continuing to testify at the Federal Emergencies Act inquiry. Superintendent Robert Bernier says the act was, quote, helpful in clearing the Freedom Convoy protesters, but doesn't know whether it was necessary. When inquiry lawyers asked Bernier whether he thought the federal legislation was necessary, he said it was really hard for him to say. Bernier says once police did move in, they noted that some of the protesters intended to stay, and officers did not want to force a confrontation.
I did not get to do the operation without it. So it would be very, I don't know what complications I would have had it not been in place and I utilized the common law. We have used it before. We have used it since without the Emergencies Act, and it has been effective. But I cannot speak for this particular date or that weekend operation. Had I not had it in that fashion, what would it look like? Hard for me to say.
You may have noticed some smoke along 5th Avenue North on Tuesday afternoon in Lethbridge. But not to worry, it was likely due to a training exercise with new firefighter recruits. BCN's Naveen Day was on the scene and has the details.
As part of their firefighter training, new recruits were required to extinguish and investigate 2 live fire burns in separate contained burn cells. The first fire was made to simulate a deliberately set fire using an accelerant, and the second was to simulate a fire that was unplanned. The new recruits say the training they are receiving is helping them prepare for real-life scenarios.
Things starting on fire, you can't always control those things, but it's a huge learning experience for us, especially that as our job evolves. You know, we're a huge part in just the investigation role of things. Like obviously we put it out, but also noticing the little things and, you know, where the fire was, how it started, things, the huge parts of the investigation and how they do their job can come from us.
According to Fire Prevention Officer Adam Satterley, fires can spread much faster than they used to decades ago. This is due to the abundance of combustible materials in modern homes. Satterley says, although it is important to get everyone to safety and put the fire out, this training will help new recruits understand what goes into an investigation.
This is a great example of us being able to show the recruits from the fire's conception, which we're really never at, but to give an idea of how fast something can burn, how fast these two scenarios can burn, and what we're able to do to show our recruits, okay, these are some of the hallmarks that you need to look for and just be aware of. We teach them evidence preservation or scene preservation. So in this sense, it's just a taste of it, but it means that, you know, when they get in there, to put out the fire, do the most important thing, you know, saving lives, putting out fire, but after that, try and maintain the scene so that our investigation team can come in and take a look at it.
There are fire simulators available in other cities. However, the majority of them are geared towards fire investigators. What makes the burn cells unique to Lethbridge is that they are designed for frontline staff. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and doctors say early screening and detection is vital to assure that a person doesn't die from the disease. Dr. Christine Molnar with the Alberta Society of Radiologists says not all breast cancers are the same, and there are some that don't progress as quickly, so it's important to have that early diagnosis.
Some breast cancers are a little bit more indolent or slower growing than other breast cancers, which are grow very quickly. And so, you know, the whole idea of screening is to see a woman's breast and see early changes, which are small. And you can't really control or even determine fully how fast a cancer will change. I mean, there are some genetic tests for it.
Sadly, breast cancer causes about 14% of all cancer-related deaths in Canadian women each and every year. It appears as though some work needs to be done when it comes to healthcare here in Alberta. That's according to Dr. John Church, a professor at the University of Alberta and author of the book, Alberta, A Health System Profile. Dr. Church says right now, we're not getting the best bang for our buck.
But the bottom line is Alberta spends more per capita than any other part of Canada, and yet we, you know, don't perform as well on some of the basic outcome measures as they do in other parts of Canada. So there is a big question mark there that, you know, needs to be addressed by the government itself.
Dr. Church will share more of his thoughts on Alberta's healthcare system coming up after Business News. Immigrants are projected to make up a third of Canada's total population by the year 2041. The latest census data shows newcomers currently make up close to 25% of all people in Canada. The proportion of immigrants is the largest it's been since Confederation, with more than 8.3 million people included in the category of immigrants. Stats Canada says immigration is the main driver of population growth, in part because of the aging population and low fertility rates in the country.
While immigration do not necessarily stop the aging process, but it does rejuvenate the working population. And I think in our daily, and I forgot about the number, and we actually have information to show I think it's 3/4 of the labor force growth is actually attributed to immigration.
The Saskatchewan government has opened a 3-day settlement reception area in Regina for newcomers to the province. It says the one-stop shop includes on-site personnel to answer questions and help issue health cards. The centre also helps newcomers process applications for social insurance numbers, set up bank accounts, and give information about housing, employment, and income assistance. Immigration Minister Jeremy Harrison says the timing coincides with the arrival of a third humanitarian flight bringing in Ukrainian refugees to Saskatchewan. While people across Manitoba went to the polls today for their municipal elections, Manitoba Premier Heather Stephenson is not ruling out calling a provincial election before the current date of October 3rd of next year. Her predecessor, Brian Pallister, called the last election back in 2019 a year ahead of schedule when the party was riding high in the opinion polls. Stephenson, however, faces different circumstances, with polls over the last 2 years suggesting the Tory support may have slipped somewhat. A jury has convicted a man of killing 6 people and injuring dozens of others when he drove his SUV through a Christmas parade in Wisconsin last year.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information, dated this 26th day of October 2022, signed by the foreperson, juror number 11. Did the defendant commit first-degree intentional homicide while using a dangerous weapon? Answer, yes.
Burn in hell, you piece of
Hey, you are to be removed right now. You will not do that. Did the defendant commit first-degree intentional homicide while using a dangerous weapon? Answer, yes.
As Rishi Sunak becomes Britain's 3rd Prime Minister of the year, residents of his grandparents' reported hometown in Pakistan welcome the news.
उनके आबाओ अजदाद हिंदू जो इन्हीं गलियों में उनकी फैमिलीज़ उनके आबाओ अजदाद रहा करते थे और ये हमारे शहर और हमारे पाकिस्तान के लिए एक एहसास की बात है.
We expect that the relationship, not only the relationship between the UK and the Pakistan will solidify because of the premiership of the Rishi Sunak, but we also expect that the relationship between India and Pakistan will also see a new era of success.
That's pretty cool. Well, listen, I've got some personal news to share with you. This Friday night at 7 p.m., I will be emceeing a special men's Christian conference at the University Drive Alliance Church here in the city. It's called Shine 22 Be the Light. There will be testimonies, lots of food, live worship, music, and powerful messages from Dr. Leonard Anderson, who was named by Maclean's magazine as one of the 5 Canadian pastors who is breathing new life into communities. And he's flying in all the way from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
I'm coming on assignment to challenge us as men of integrity, men of purpose, men of zeal, to let our light so shine before men that they may see our good works and glorify our Father which is in heaven. I ask you to join me for this life-defining conference. This is going to be a moment in our history, a moment on the journey where God will meet us and set us ablaze. Would you please join me as we ignite each other for Christian service? I can't wait to meet you.
And we can't wait to meet you as well, Pastor Leonard. Shine 22, Be the Light men's conference this Friday and Saturday in Lethbridge. Admission is $20 for both days or by donation. And more information can be found on the Southern Alberta Men's Ministry website. Well, it was slightly cooler in Lethbridge today with a bit of that autumn wind, but fortunately the mercury is going up. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. The cool winds, which blew into much of southwestern Alberta, sadly blew a lot of the colorful leaves off of the trees. Jeanette Rocher is in now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, it was slightly cooler today, but fortunately, a warming trend is on the way.
Yeah, it absolutely is about to warm up. Hell, look at those double-digit temperatures beginning tomorrow, Thursday, 10 degrees, climbing all the way up to 13 degrees on Friday with sunny skies, remaining the same there for Saturday, sunshine and 13 degrees, climbing to 14 for Sunday with a mix of sun and cloud down to 7 degrees on Monday, and then rounding out that 7-day forecast with a high of 4 degrees for Tuesday. So mainly seasonal, as our average high for this time of year is 11 degrees, average low 2 degrees. The record high on this day was back in 1944. It was 26, and it was a chilly minus 22 back in 1939. That's very, very cold for October. 8:10, that is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening, 6:20 p.m., giving us 10 hours and 10 minutes of daylight. A bit of a rainy one tomorrow, not to mention a windy one on the west coast. Victoria, high of 15, periods of rain, 60 k winds there, up to 70 km/h winds in Vancouver. Vancouver, though, and 15 to 25 millimeters of rain expected there. 11 the high. 15 the high in Edmonton tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud, and partly cloudy skies expected tomorrow. In Calgary with a high of 7 degrees. Also 60k winds expected there. 10 degrees the high tomorrow with lots of sunshine in Saskatoon. Sunny day expected tomorrow as well in Regina with a high of 3 degrees. 9 degrees expected tomorrow in Winnipeg with partly cloudy skies, looking at 30 to 50k winds in those prairie cities as well. Toronto expecting lots of wind as well, 60 kilometer per hour. 12 degrees the high there with a mix of sun and cloud. 10 degrees the high for both Ottawa and Montreal tomorrow with partly cloudy skies. Montreal going to be also very gusty as well. It's just a very windy country tomorrow. Fredericton looking at a 40% chance of showers tomorrow, high of 20 degrees. A lovely high of 20 also in Halifax. Showers expected to end in the morning. Charlottetown 19 the high, and some drizzle expected tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland, also 19 degrees there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Are you tired of high energy bills? Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
The Bank of Canada raised its key interest rate by 0.5 percentage point today to 3.75%. It's the 6th straight increase aimed at clamping down on decades-high inflation. The central bank is warning that more increases may be needed. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says there are no easy outs in restoring price stability.
Our decision today reflects several considerations. First, inflation in Canada remains high and broad-based. Inflation has come down in recent months, but we have yet to see a generalized decline in price pressures. Second, and related, the economy is still in excess demand. It's overheated. Households and businesses want to buy more goods and services than the economy can produce, and this is driving prices up. Third, higher interest rates are beginning to weigh on growth. This is increasingly evident in interest rate sensitive parts of the economy like housing and spending on big ticket items. But the effects of higher interest rates will take time to spread through the economy.
The U.S. Federal Reserve is also expected to raise rates by a more aggressive approach of 0.75 percentage point next week. Economists say if that does happen, the lower Bank of Canada increase could further weaken the Canadian dollar and fuel inflation by making imports from the United States much more expensive. The Competition Bureau is raising concerns about the impact of WestJet's proposed acquisition of Sunwing Vacations and Sunwing Airlines on travelers. In a report to the Transport Minister, it says the merger would likely result in increased prices, less choice, and decreases in service for Canadians. It says it would also likely result in a drop in travel by Canadians on a variety of routes where WestJet's and Sunwing's existing travel networks overlap. The federal cabinet will have the final say on the deal based on a recommendation from the Transport Minister. Analysts say the federal industry minister's new conditions on the Rogers-Shaw merger suggests he supports the deal. The stipulations address the sale of Shaw-owned wireless carrier Freedom Mobile to Quebeccor's Videotron in a bid to preserve competition. Analysts say François-Philippe Champagne is signaling that the deal would be acceptable if Quebecor has the ability to properly compete in the long term. Industry insiders believe there's a 90% chance the Rogers-Shaw deal will close. Now is a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 182 points on the day to finish at 19,279. The Dow was up 2 points to 31,839. The S&P 500 was down 28 points on the day to 3830, and the Nasdaq was down 92 points to 10,952. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $2.59 to $87.91 US per barrel. Natural gas was down a cent to $5.61 US. Gold was down 5 cents to $16.64.52 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $19.59 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.65 per bushel, barley's at $9.90, canola's at $19.40, and corn is at $12.09 per bushel. Live cattle were down 23 cents to $151.45. Feeder cattle were down 18 cents to $176.43. And lean hogs December contract was up 5 cents to $88.50. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.74 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Bank of Canada raised its key lending rate by a half a percentage point today to 3.75%. It's the sixth straight increase aimed at clamping down on decades-high inflation. The central bank is warning that more increases may be needed. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she doesn't want anything to do with the World Economic Forum or the WEF, especially when it comes to our healthcare system. Political reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us in just a moment. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Men in the southern Alberta area are invited to a 2-day conference called Shine 22, Be the Light, taking place in Lethbridge at University Drive Alliance Church, October 28th and 29th. BCN's Hal Roberts will MC the conference, and special guest speaker Pastor Leonard Anderson will share powerful messages that will challenge and encourage you. Admission is $20, $10 for those 18 and under. For more information, call 403-381-7171 or visit Southern Alberta Men's Ministry Facebook page. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, visit lethseniors.com/volunteer drivers. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
Party conventions just wrapped up in both Calgary and Edmonton involving the UCP and the NDP. To discuss them in more detail is our political reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, what was the overall tone or theme from Premier Danielle Smith in Edmonton?
Well, the tone from Danielle Smith, I think, in the theme was freedom. She talked sort of a lot about freedom, sort of adjacent things, in addition to really getting on message about some of the other issues that she wants her party to tackle. Now, the convention itself, the theme was definitely unity. In a bit of a funny twist, that was actually kind of the theme last year, but of course, the United Conservative Party was not particularly united at all last year. 6 months, 8 months later, they dumped Premier Jason Kenney and had a leadership race. But there was very much, in everybody I talked to over the course of the weekend, this sense that the party needs to come together. The party needs to line up behind the leader, whether they were, Travis Taves supporters or Rajan Sawhney supporters or Leela Heer supporters. They need to line up behind Danielle Smith if they have a chance at winning the next election. So there was a great deal of enthusiasm in some quarters, certainly the sort of Danielle Smith supporters, the people that didn't like Jason Kenney, a lot of enthusiasm and excitement on that side of that faction, I guess you could say, sort of the old Wild Rose wing of the party. From the sort of more institutional, shall we say, maybe the former PCs, the former Kenney people, a little bit less thrilled, I think would be fair to say. A little bit of caution, a little bit of concern about the party's prospects going into the next election. So quite an interesting dynamic. But at the end of the day, I think it's totally fair to say that unity was sort of the theme over the course of the weekend.
Now, Premier Smith apologized to the unvaccinated, whom she said were discriminated against. Now, Smith also made mention that her government will have nothing to do with the World Economic Forum, the WEF. Can you explain?
Sure. So the apology was she had a speech on sort of Saturday afternoon, and then immediately had a press conference after that. Reporters asked her a bunch of questions, both about the World Economic Forum and about the unvaccinated. And the question that was put to her is, when will you apologize to the unvaccinated Albertans who lost their jobs? And she said she was happy to do it right then and there, and she did so. And I think it's probably the first time a premier that I'm aware of anyways has offered an apology like that. And she sort of invited back the people who had lost their jobs. Now, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many people that is. Certainly in the bureaucracy, there was some reporting about nurses, for example, who were unable to work. So that was sort of the unvaccinated side of things. And then on the World Economic Forum side of things, it was a bit confusing, I have to say, because we'd asked her what she was talking about specifically. She had said that there was AHS, Alberta Health Services, had this agreement with the World Economic Forum, but she couldn't really point to exactly what it is. What it seems to be is a sort of research agreement of sorts, sort of a resource sharing agreement. So, I think it's probably fair to say we're not totally sure what she was talking about. But she did say that the Alberta government would have nothing to do with it. And just a little throwback for the people that were maybe watching politics back in 2014, Smith was actually really harsh with I think it was the Redford government maybe, or the Prentice government at the time, because the WEF was supposed to have a conference in Alberta. And Smith said it was a real black eye for the province that they weren't coming here. And I can't remember exactly why. But lots happening in that press conference for sure. And I think reporters are going to be interested in following up all these things in the weeks ahead.
Now, Premier Smith also says she wants to help Albertans with the high cost of living so many of us are struggling right now. And that includes potentially lowering the price of gas, as in what, maybe less provincial sales tax on fuel?
Yeah, it's not actually clear yet what the plan is there. So she had this in her keynote address. She sort of had 4 topics on 4 priorities, and sort of the big ones were affordability and inflation, and fuel prices were one of the things that she talked about. And she also talked about putting more money into the pockets of seniors and other vulnerable Albertans. Now, she was a bit thin on the details, which is not totally surprising. Of course, she's only been premier for 2 weeks, I guess it is. So a couple options there, I suppose. One would be to bring back the full fuel tax cut. Of course, it's graded based on oil prices at the moment, so that however many cents it is now, 7 cents, I think, could be taken off. There could be price controls of some sort, I suppose, would be another option, but we're just not sure yet exactly what some of those policy choices might look like.
Tyler, let's chat about some of Premier Smith's cabinet appointments. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf becomes the new Minister of Infrastructure and Deputy Premier. Now, it's a new post for him, but Smith kept a lot of the key Kenny ministers, including Travis Taves as Finance Minister?
She did. So Travis Taves remains in finance. Adriana LaGrange, who was education, and Sonia Savage, who was energy, are both still in cabinet as well. 2 notable people that were removed from cabinet were Jason Nixon, who was a relatively close Kenny ally and was the Environment and Parks Minister, and Rick McIver, sort of long-term Conservative stalwart. So they're both out of cabinet at the moment. But what Smith did do, though, was actually bring in a number of her leadership rivals. So, as you mentioned, Travis Taves is back and still in finance. Todd Loewen from sort of the Grand Prairie region is the minister for, the Environment and Parks and Forestry Ministries kind of got broken up and amalgamated. So he has one of those roles. Brian Jean has a Jobs and Northern Development ministerial appointment. It's a big cabinet. It's like 27 people, I think, and then 11, I believe, parliamentary secretaries. So a lot happening there, but certainly some familiar faces, which I think reflects, where some of the experience is in cabinet, and, also a sense that they do need a little bit of continuity, especially on some of these, really, really important ministries like finance. And someone, Travis Taves has been around in that role for a few years now, so he knows it inside and out.
What's interesting about Todd Loewen is the fact he was sitting as an independent after he was kicked out of caucus from then Premier Jason Kenney. And Drew Barnes is also still sitting as an independent down in Medicine Hat region. What's the latest there?
The latest seems to be that Smith had said that there needs to be some work to sort of rebuild trust before he can be let back into cabinet. It's not super clear to me what that means, but Drew Barnes is still an independent. I think the only remaining independent. There was sort of 3 of them at one point. Pat Wren was among them, and he had been let back into caucus some months ago now. So, the Drew Barnes thing is still a little bit up in the air as far as I'm aware, but certainly Todd Loewen back in caucus and in cabinet. So moving up in the world for Todd Loewen.
Justice Minister Tyler Shandro is facing a disciplinary hearing from the Law Society of Alberta, and it stems back from an incident in which he confronted a doctor in his driveway when he was health minister a few years ago. Can you explain really what transpired?
Sure. So this was sort of during the relatively acrimonious contract negotiations between doctors and Alberta Health, if I remember correctly. And he had sort of gone over to this driveway, this doctor's driveway, and confronted him about some of this stuff. And the doctor, I guess, felt that this was sort of unbecoming conduct. And there's actually sort of 2 other allegations that are sort of floating around in the context of this stuff. One of them is that he used his position as Minister of Health to get personal phone numbers for staff and phone them outside of work hours. And the other one is that he sort of allegedly threatened to refer a woman to the authorities with whom he had a disagreement. So basically, the Law Society hearing is simply whether or not sort of he's brought the law profession into disrepute with these actions, and that hearing is going to be in late January. So there's actually a date set for that now, and I believe it had been rescheduled a week or two ago, and so we now know the date of when that's going to be dealt with, I suppose.
Tyler, the UCP is understanding how important it is for Calgary to get a new arena deal done. I mean, the Saddle Dome and all of its charm and character is almost 40 years old now, one of the oldest unrenovated arenas in the NHL. Now, Premier Smith said the province may actually get involved. What will that look like? Maybe extra taxpayers' dollars? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it could. Pretty thin on the details at the moment, which, as I've sort of said a couple times, we're early days here, so that's not totally surprising. But the government has said, Smith posted a letter to social media on Tuesday, I think it was, basically saying that the government was going to get involved to sort of look at what they can do to make this deal happen. Certainly, one possibility would be some sort of putting up some sort of money to get involved, but we just don't know yet. But big news, I think, for the people of Calgary who had this deal fall apart. Must have been a couple of years ago now. So we'll have to see. But this is, I think, one of the first sort of big moves maybe that Danielle Smith has made, and also notable because in order to win an election, this is taking a bird's eye view here. There's three constituencies in Alberta. You need rural Alberta, or Edmonton, or Calgary. You need two of the three. And at the moment, the UCP has one, and that's rural and small town Alberta. So they need to focus on Edmonton or Calgary, really. And so I think when you look at the arena stuff from the perspective of the electoral politics at play here, I think certainly making some waves in Calgary is going to be part of what we see the UCP do in the months ahead.
And the arena is not just about the Flames, but it's about drawing in, lots of exhibitors and concerts and stuff. In fact, the first big concert I ever attended was 1985, Tears for Fears. That's all.
There you go.
that's older than you are, I bet, right?
I'm afraid to say it is, yeah.
There you go. Tyler, opposition leader Rachel Notley and the NDP held their convention in Calgary recently. What was the main theme there? I mean, they were acting kind of like a government in waiting.
I think it's fair to say that probably is the NDP's theme at the moment. They are trying to put themselves in a position where people look at them as the next government and also are not particularly scared of them. Rachel Notley in her speech had sort of suggested that Smith was, fear mongering about NDP socialism and stuff like that. But they're, trying to provide a relatively mainstream, viable alternative to the United Conservatives. And so I think that it's fair to say that that's sort of the theme, that they are trying to project themselves as the government in waiting, the party of stability that does not have infighting, that will be focused on Albertans instead of infighting. That's sort of the message they've been hammering for some months now. And I think we're going to see that sort of continue in the weeks and months ahead. Notable that the UCP convention was in Edmonton and the NDP convention was in Calgary. And I think this, it has to do with the fact that the conventions have been flipped in years past. But also, again, this is an electoral politics thing. Both those parties need to think about how they're going to win the parts of Calgary that they need to in order to form a government in 6 months, 7 months' time.
Yeah, try and build up support. UCP in Edmonton, NDP in Calgary, absolutely. Tyler, the NDP adopted some notable policies, including lowering the voting age in Alberta to 16. Why do you think they're pushing for that? Are they thinking, if I'm old enough to drive a vehicle at 16, why not vote?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. This debate has gone on at the federal level a little bit in the last year or so, and I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere. But I think from the NDP perspective, there's some sort of electoral genius there. When you look, it's sort of the old aphorism, that if you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative by 50, you have no brain, or whatever the specifics of it is. But I think probably the New Democrats are looking at some of the concerns of younger Albertans and some of the things that they are worried about, and education, for example, student loans, housing prices, those sorts of things, and are thinking, well, you know what, gosh, there's probably some electoral benefit to having 16-year-olds voting. There's also a principled argument for it, but that was certainly one of the things that made a bit of a splash coming out of the NDP convention.
Premier Smith is planning on running in a by-election in Brooks Medicine Hat next month. After all, she needs a seat at the legislature. Now she's going up against Alberta Party leader Barry Morishita and the NDP's Gwendolyn Dirk. Morishita is the former Brooks mayor.
Yeah, so that is actually an interesting dynamic. This is probably a relatively safe spot for Danielle Smith to be running, certainly compared to the other option that was before her, which is the riding of Calgary Elbow. But she's running against someone who's pretty well known in the area. And Barry Morishita, of course, the Alberta Party, is not a super left-wing party, running to the left of Danielle Smith, certainly, and the UCP, certainly. But not a New Democrat. So do I think Danielle Smith's going to lose? No, I don't. I think she'll probably take her seat in the legislature. But it does suggest that this is not necessarily going to be a cakewalk for her. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how she tries to appeal to those voters when she has a really viable candidate who's not the New Democrat. And you could see some vote splitting. You could see some vote splitting between the NDP and the Alberta Party, or the UCP and the Alberta Party. So it'll be an interesting one to watch, especially because I know I'm rambling on here, but of course she doesn't live in Brooks Medicine Hat. So she's out on doorsteps, meeting people, introducing herself. So it's going to be quite interesting to watch that unfold, I think.
So what's going to happen with Calgary Elbow, that riding specifically? Will it remain vacant leading up to the next provincial election in May?
That does seem to be the plan. The NDP is making a lot of noise about this too, saying that, the people of Calgary Elbow are not going to have a representative for the next 7 months. And the UCP has basically said, the grassroots want to have a proper sort of candidate vetting nomination process to get a candidate for that riding, instead of just, say, nominating someone to run or something like that. But the NDP is not happy about it. And you have to wonder how happy some of the Calgary Elbow voters are about it. And the outcome of that, of course, is going to be in the election in 7 months' time. By end of May 29th, I think.
That was Schweitzer's old riding too, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so. So it was a UCP riding. So, there is the risk, of course, that this flips that riding for the New Democrats. So it's, people always talk about by-elections and things as like a bellwether, and whether that's true or not is maybe beside the point. But this certainly feels like one of those ridings to keep an eye on over the next few months.
Absolutely. Political reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
Up until 2009, healthcare in Alberta was managed by smaller community-centered boards, but that all changed with the creation of a centralized health authority. To talk more specifically about Alberta Health Services is University of Alberta professor and author John Church. Earlier this year, John Church wrote a book entitled Alberta, a Health System Profile. He joins us now from Edmonton. John, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Great to be here.
Okay, so John, you mentioned in your book that Alberta spends the highest amounts in Canada for healthcare costs, but has mediocre outcomes. So did you find a reason for this?
Well, the book was not really about trying to define what the reason is, and it's quite complicated. But the bottom line is Alberta spends more per capita than any other part of Canada, and yet we, don't perform as well on some of the basic outcome measures as they do in other parts of Canada. So there is a big question mark there that needs to be addressed by the government itself.
That is so interesting. So, of course, we've been hearing from our new Alberta Premier about possible changes to Alberta Health Services. So can you describe if you've noticed the level of healthcare services change for Albertans since the creation of this centralized board?
Well, Alberta was not performing well on those comparative measures prior to AHS, but the development of AHS didn't really improve Alberta's performance compared to other provinces. I mean, there were some gains, but you can see that by and large, the system has not performed as well as it should. And, I should, to give AHS credit, they haven't had any stable leadership since they were created. There was significant political interference from the province from the get-go. And I think that is part of the reason that they have not been able to perform as well as an organization, because there's been too much political interference from provincial politicians.
Yeah, good point. And of course, now it's all over the news. And so
now they're doing it again. The time when Alberta Health Services was starting to perform better was when Verna Yu was in charge, and she was in for 6 years. So she was the longest serving leader, CEO that they've had since they were created. And there was also greater stability with the board as well during that time period. So the government during that time period didn't meddle as much in the daily operations of Alberta Health Services as they had previously done. And that's when the organization seemed to be starting to perform better. So, political interference, I think, is a real problem with the way they're trying to run things.
Okay, so I mean, everyone's talking about their failures these days, but to be fair to them, are there any successes that you've seen that have advanced healthcare services for Albertans through AHS?
Oh, for sure. They've been able to bring down costs through being able to do bulk purchasing of a lot of stuff that gets used in the health system. So rather than having each individual regional health authority, or in the old days, each individual hospital having to make their own purchases, Alberta Health Services can make purchases just for one organization at the provincial level, and they have more buying power, so to speak, in the marketplace because they are such a big organization. So, I mean, that's one example. They're doing things now to get health providers to collaborate more with each other, work together more with each other. So there have been a variety of things that they have been able to do, but that's only to the extent that there hasn't been political interference, and that they've had sufficient funding from the provincial government to be able to get on and do the job that they're supposed to be doing. And both of those things have been an issue really since the creation of Alberta Health Services, if not before.
And so then, in your opinion, what would be the biggest failure? Would it be the political interference like you were mentioning?
I think that the constant political interference it's extremely disruptive. If you think about any business that you're trying to run, and if you were constantly changing the senior manager, the person who's running your company, and you're constantly interfering with the way they were trying to run that company, what do you think the results would be?
Right. Yeah. Now, John, from your research, which you've done a lot of, what would be the most effective course of change for AHS and the United Conservative Party, for that matter? So do you think it's fair for Danielle Smith to be placing all the blame at the foot of the board? And, should she clean house like she says she's going to?
No, because the current UCP government, the Kenney government, they actually appointed almost all those people, and some of them were only appointed a couple of months ago. So why Danielle Smith thinks that coming in and getting rid of people who were appointed by her own government is going to fix or change anything, doesn't really make any sense. Other than that, she's looking for somebody to punish because of some of the decisions that were made by the government about restrictions that were placed on people during the pandemic that were unpopular with a very small percentage of the Alberta population. But that small percentage, just happened to be the people that are supporting Danielle Smith. So, beyond that, there is no clear rationale as to why this is going to fix anything in the healthcare system. If they really want to fix things in the healthcare system, what the government could do is they could come up with a policy for seniors services to make sure that seniors get the supports that they need out in communities, so that they don't end, things like help shoveling snow, help cutting their grass, maintaining their properties, help getting groceries, help cleaning their house, not to mention the home care services that they already get, so the medical related services they already get. If the government would come up with a really good policy for that, and if the government would also come up with a policy for ensuring that all Albertans have got access to primary care out in the community, those two things alone would go a long way to helping out to bring down the pressures that are on acute care facilities, because everyone now, they end up going to acute care facilities because they can't get the care that they need out in the community. So if the government really wanted to do something, they would do that. And that's not on AHS because AHS does not control a lot of those things that are going on out in the community. That's government that's controlling that, and it's government and the relationship with the province's doctors. So, that would be a better use of government's time than trying to constantly shuffle the deck chairs on the SSAHS, right? Which is, what they seem to be constantly doing.
Now, John, you just mentioned something very interesting, very important, doctors. Okay, so obviously a big issue in many Alberta communities, like Lethbridge, for instance, is that they've been seeing a lack of family doctors. So did you find in your research clues as to why doctors are leaving Alberta?
Well, I mean, when I did my research, the physician population was fairly stable in Alberta, and it was actually the decision by the UCP government to rip up the collective agreement with the doctors that started that movement by doctors to leave the province. And in fact, the government had to sort of push back and say, well, if you're going to leave the province, you've got to give us notice. You can't just all start leaving all at once, because they were afraid that out in rural communities in particular, that you might get a whole group of doctors that would just decide all at once they were going to leave. Right. So yeah, again, that rests squarely on the shoulders of the current UCP government that we're having that kind of a problem with doctors. Now, again, if the government wanted to do something about that, they would look at what other healthcare providers might provide the same or similar services to family doctors. And clearly the research indicates that nurse practitioners could fill that role if they were given the chance. But the government here has never been willing to make that move and start putting nurse practitioners out in rural areas in significant enough numbers to make any difference in terms of how rural Albertans are able to access their healthcare services. And, for your viewers who are living in rural Alberta, research clearly shows that nurse practitioners are trained in a very similar way to family doctors, and that they can provide you with the level of care, a very similar level of care to family doctors. So they are highly qualified. They simply need government to put a policy in place that will make it possible for them to work out in rural communities. Not to mention, they could be used in long-term care facilities as well to beef up the level of care that Alberta seniors are getting in long-term care facilities. So there are options out there that the government could pursue if it wanted to.
Yeah, that's a great solution. I know you've mentioned a few others. Well, can you think of any other solutions that would bring spending and health outcomes more in line with expectations?
Well, those are really I mean, for me, the major issue is relieving pressures on the acute care system, and those pressures are caused largely by the fact that people do not have enough options out in the community so that they can deal with their issues out in the community and they don't end up on the doorstep of the hospital constantly. So, I mean, I've given you a couple of possible examples of how that might be dealt with, but there are all kinds of innovative things that might be done out in the community to keep people out in the community, keep people healthier out in the community, keep people closer to their families, especially seniors, because no senior wants to go to a long-term care facility. They would rather remain in their community, close to their friends and family, and be supported in that way. And that's really the thing we need to look at, is how we can make that happen. I mean, for mental health patients, the same thing. They end up in the emergency room because there's nowhere else in the community for them to go, because there aren't enough resources out there under the way things are currently run. So, deal with stuff out in the community, get the community side of things organized so that people have sufficient resources to get the services they need out there, and the problems in hospitals, by and large, will be resolved.
Now, John, would there maybe be another national healthcare system that would be a good option or a good example for this government to maybe investigate and perhaps emulate here in our province?
Well, I mean, the province of Ontario, comparatively speaking, spends far less money per capita than the province of Alberta. So, there's obviously something going on in Ontario that allows them to spend less money than Alberta, and also to, on a lot of indicators, perform better than Alberta. So there's definitely something going on there. And in fact, the current government in Ontario, which is also a conservative government, incidentally, has recently announced that it wants to put more nurse practitioners in long-term care facilities. So that was, one of the things that I suggested. Ontario is already doing it. So obviously Ontario is listening to the advice that they're getting from their experts, and they're taking that advice and they're trying to turn it into, into policies that are going to make their system better. And I think that, the government here is going to have to listen to the advice of the experts and move forward on making some of these changes and stop spending their time fiddling around with who's on the board of AHS.
Oh, great advice there. And why spend time looking beyond borders when there's solutions right here within Canada and even within Alberta? John, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. That was the University of Alberta Professor John Church, who is the author of Alberta, A Health System Profile, who joined us from Edmonton today. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.